was very pleased to see this article last week in The Atlantic, a full featured article, putting it up on the split screen here. There it is, How to Disappear by Benjamin Wallace. Talks all about havenX, talks about Alec, talks about a lot of stuff, keeping your life private in an increasingly encroaching panopticon of a digital just craziness. And it was very exciting to see this. So we started at Alec because it's just a challenge to the hackers to find out everything about you. Or are you just living the brand? Or I don't know. I mean, in the article, they said that the author came to your house. So right there, that just seems like, mistake number one, my friend. Come on, you're just challenging. You're challenging everyone here. This is very interesting. How did the article come about?
Yeah. So please don't dox me. But I have a couple thoughts on that. And so first of all, no one was more surprised than me last year when Ben, the author, reached out and he sent me an email. And as soon as I got it, I passed it to our OSINT lead because I was certain it was a scam. I just wasn't sure what the scam was, because I don't get inquiries from the media as a general proposition. I get inquiries from Turkish banks that say they need a U.S. citizen in order to withdraw some gold inheritance from the Ottoman Empire. I get that kind of inquiry. But I thought for sure it was a scam. We interrogated the email address and his name, and everything appeared to be legit. So I responded, and he said he had recently written a book on Satoshi. And everyone should check out the book, by the way. He's a great writer, and he just took an interest in the whole Satoshi myth and who is he and how has he remained, he, they, whatever she, remained this private for this long, especially under what is possibly the most scrutiny any private individual has ever had. Amateur OSINTers, cypherpunks, media, right? Maybe governments. Many have been interested in who Satoshi is. And as far as public disclosure, we've never seen anything compelling. There's always interesting stories, right? But there's no one compelling. So after writing that book, Ben said he got interested in other people who might live an extreme privacy lifestyle, and who are they and what does it look like? And so he found some stuff I had written, no one being more surprised than me. And he said, can we do a call? And we had some conversations back and forth, and it led to him asking if he could come spend the day and just see what in practice this lifestyle looks like. How anomalous, how quirky, how difficult is it? Because I had been saying, it takes a lot of work to set it up, but once you get used to it, it looks like every other life, right? With, more like small adjustments on the perimeter as opposed to a wholesale different way of living. And that's not to say there aren't other people living extreme privacy lifestyles that have gone further than I have or have implemented things, in a more robust, off the grid way. And some of those people are in the article as well. But the premise for me is, and I say this to our clients as well, you can live an extremely private life and still have a normal posture towards the world. You can still have a podcast. You can still speak at conferences. You can do things like a normal person, because sometimes people see these extreme privacy lifestyles and they might be executives or whoever, and they say, that sounds great. I could never do that. It's not possible for me to maintain my professional presence and live that way. And so I would argue with some trade-offs, you can do it. And that's my version of extreme privacy.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, as I said earlier, because, this stuff is serious. If there's a data leak, a hack, and there have been many in the Bitcoin space where your address is doxed, especially with the bearer asset that is Bitcoin, that can have serious implications no matter how much you might have. But you are obviously, we've been on this show for a while now. We've talked about Ukraine a lot lately. We've talked about trade and tariffs. a little bit about Bitcoin in the past few months, but we haven't done enough, I think, on this, what you're actually an expert at with your day job. So I really want to dig into that with this episode. Um,
Well, I
you
think
know,
like you brought up the critical point, because a lot of what we do is in the crypto space, and it's it's a pretty dangerous time in physical security and crypto, right? As we know, right? Every week there's a new story, and like this horrifying story out of New York last week with the guy being, tortured in the apartment in Soho. It was just one of a string of many of stories, we've seen out of France and Canada and the US and Southeast Asia. And, with the Coinbase incident, right? Lots and lots of users being doxxed in that. There's this inherent tension between KYC and AML and privacy. And so like I don't use any platforms where that KYC and AML would penetrate to my true home address. I just won't. That's a security risk for me. Not necessarily because I think the company might mishandle the information, although that's certainly a possibility, but because of the almost inevitability of these breaches. And so at that point, they get brokered, initially usually peer to peer or on the dark web, and then eventually they usually enter some form of public domain. And so any nefarious actor could look through that list, and then maybe they would correlate that with your home address and the zip code you live in and the home value you have, and make some assumptions about your wealth. And they would target people who have homes that might be good for targeting, or people who have easily identifiable pattern of life who also appear to be wealthy and are probably owners of maybe more crypto than others. And you can triage through that list and find yourself a target fairly easily. And so I think for people that own bearer assets, and not just Bitcoin, right, but gold, diamonds, guns, stock certificates, whatever it is, this is critical.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm still curious though on your decision making tree, how this article worked, because if one reads the article, there is some pretty, there's some information there. I wonder if some of it is perhaps Easter eggs to mislead the reader. A big theme of your article of the recommendation in this article is being comfortable with sort of innocuous fibbing, for example. And a simple example would be the dog toys in your front yard, even though perhaps you might or might not have a dog. And, the list goes on from there. But, how comfortable were you yourself? I'm just curious, how comfortable were you yourself actually with this process? Because this was a pretty major news outlet and a major journalist who came to your house to write about how you try to keep your house address secret.
Yeah. So some number of years into this, and we do have our own OSINT team. So, we have the ability to red team my work. And so 6, 7, 10, 5 years, whatever it's been, is enough to allow for data leakage to propagate. And so we haven't seen that. And we haven't seen other vectors yield a true home address. What I will say is that Ben Wallace and the Atlantic magazine conducted themselves with a lot of integrity around the asks I had, the conditions that made me comfortable with the article. And so some of that was not sharing certain information. Some of it was just the ambiguity or several ways you could interpret information. And some of it was, not necessarily painting a direct path towards accurate, my accurate location. And so they were very, very honorable about that. And there were certain things I said going in, hey, these things are off limits. And one was things that would be able to indicate our clients, and two, things that would lead back to my true home residence. So I know it's interesting to see. I think we've talked about the media on the show before, and the media does not always cover itself in integrity and glory. And I think there's probably fair criticisms of the media, but as a person going through the process of this article, the Atlantic had 4 to 5 rounds of editors reviewing it. And then they had a fact checker who was extremely detailed. So I did like an hour-long call with the fact checker going over, broad topics to inane little details. And then there was another review after that, and all the way through, like Ben was fact checking as well. And these were things that are not breaking news, right? This was just to make sure the article had integrity. So my experience from this one case was that this magazine cares quite a bit about being accurate.
Yeah, that's great, man. It's really interesting. We're not affiliated with the Atlantic, but I highly recommend it just because obviously the American European orbit has a lot of shared values, and I think the Atlantic is a good outlet to explore those. One of the oldest magazines in the United States. I guess I should ask as well, just to back up big picture. We've talked about it before, but for those that are just tuning in or don't know, uh, there was Halo Privacy. Now there is havenX. You're CEO of havenX. What are you guys doing in your extreme privacy consultations?
Yeah, so Halo is the original entity, and in 2023 we spun out the private sector practice, which is havenX. And so, not surprisingly to you or to anyone that knows us, a good portion of our clients are in the crypto space, and that's in part because it's a space that I care a lot about, and you and I have many contacts and history in that space, so it's a place that we do business. But it's also a space that cares about personal privacy, or many people do, especially people who've been around for a while. They came to Bitcoin because they cared about having agency over their money, about censorship resistance, about immutability, all these principles that have a strong correlation with personal privacy. And so we found a lot of resonance in the crypto space, but we have clients obviously who aren't. But what we're really doing is helping people to assess their risk and then implement countermeasures that are appropriate for where they are and what they can tolerate. And I think it mentions in the article, but I'm not one that says everyone has to do everything to the extreme. In fact, that's usually counterproductive. So what I'm usually recommending is some initial ratcheting up of some improvement of protocol, some improvement of hygiene, cyber hygiene, OPSEC. And if you want to go all the way, right, we'll go all the way with you. But getting off of zero in the security sense is extremely valuable. And what I compare it to is being the best lit house on the street, right? The house that the burglar doesn't want to go into because it's got security cameras and floodlighting and maybe not a dog, right? And so that house is just a deterrent, and so you could do the same thing in your digital life that you might do in your physical life, and so that's well worth it, and that's our opening salvo.
Yeah, but your service, just to get it out of the way, I mean, your service it's for fairly uh, it's a fairly high end. It's a fairly high end sort of a product, is it not?
It is, unfortunately. And I think we will see a trend towards efficiency, including in these kind of niche spaces like privacy. But it's the powers that collect data are much greater, much more powerful, much more well monetized, well capitalized than the powers that counter that. And so it costs quite a bit to counter the big data collection. Panopticon is the word you used earlier, that we all live in. And so we hope to see maybe, like, this is a cliche thing to say, but if there's AI tooling that makes some of this more efficient and accessible to people, that don't have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars, that would be great, and I'd be all for it. And I know there are projects that are trying to do that, but to do it really effectively, unfortunately, it requires technology and labor.
Yeah. Can you just give a couple examples of some of the things that you do though? Because I think it's pretty interesting. And I mean, you've told me the process. This might be going down to the county, records and finding some records of someone. Like you do audits of people's privacy. You try to do like white hat hacking sort of their lives to see if you can find them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
So, and full disclosure, we've never not been able to find someone. But that's usually because people are coming
mm,
to us as a before picture. They're not coming to us as an after picture. And so it's not on, no shade on them for us being able to find them. But
right.
we have found, so I'll give you an example, right? Like, we have some people who come to us that are already at a more sophisticated or advanced state than the average person. But there's so many little quirks to data collection that unless you live in that space like we do, and I could barely keep up with it myself, it's almost impossible to follow all of the breadcrumbs. And so we had a guy who came to us who was a phenomenally sophisticated person on many fronts, but including privacy, and has a whole team around him by virtue of his position in life. And so the team is implementing privacy. He's got legal, right? He's got family office. He's got the whole all of the resources needed to be successful, and he's done some stuff that was really effective on the privacy front. But we were able to, like you mentioned, go down to the county property records office in the city where he lives, where this residence is that was masked, and we pulled the full paper copy of the property record associated with his home, because there wasn't anything digitally, but sometimes the full property record is more fulsome. We pulled that and we found some addresses that were actually associated with like sort of like shared office places in another city that had been used to register the agent. And then we ran those addresses through breach data, through like, data that had been breached associated with those email addresses. And we
Yep.
found the owner's name, right? And so I would argue that owner did almost everything possible perfectly. And it would take a lot of effort for someone to figure out that they own that property. But because of this arcane little, data point that was in a breach associated with an email that you had to go pull public records to find, they're not 100% masked. And I would still tell them they did everything perfectly, right? Like I wouldn't have expected them to know this one little thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does get overwhelming. I mean, that's like for someone like me hearing that story, who certainly wants as much privacy as I can get, it gets a little overwhelming. Europe has GDPR, which supposedly is keeping people more protected. At some of this level, we've talked about this with Seth for privacy. It's
Mhm.
you can tell everybody that really, hey, keep my contact information if you have it, or don't send me Christmas cards or whatever. But it just takes one person on a phone saying, "Oh yeah, I'll share my contacts with, you know, Telegram or WhatsApp or something." And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, Telegram has their contact info, which has your contact info. So it's like there is an endless cascade of risks here. But you know, I don't. I think it's pretty hard to mask your address in Europe, at least for maybe the lay person. I think it's maybe a little bit easier in the U.S., but you would have to do it around moving. Is that correct?
For sure. Although, just to comment on Europe, you have years of experience working with clients there, not as many as in the US, but it's kind of like a win and a loss there. And so GDPR makes it much harder to do open source diligence on someone. Like when we do an open source, what we would call a digital vulnerability assessment, or kind of like a white hat targeting of someone, we find on the order of like 5 times more information on an American typically than we would on a European. And that's because GDPR is very effective. The flip side of that is there's much more on the forced disclosure to government databases, and we talked about Sweden before, right? Like where tax records and property records are all open to the public, and so it's very easy to find either where someone's business is registered or where they truly live. And so while GDPR is effective, the governments aren't like doing their part. And so I would overall, it's harder to accrue privacy, extreme privacy in Europe, but it's easier to get basic privacy in Europe.
Okay. Okay. And then in the US, if you would actually try to mask your address, you'd probably need a trust. You probably need to do it when you move. You probably need to hire
Yeah,
someone like you to help.
sure. You could self-implement, right? And part of the reason I share what I do is because others before me, like Mike Basil, have shared what they did that allowed me to learn and do it. Jameson Lott shared what he did, allowed me to learn,
Yep.
and many others. So what I don't think it's fair to take those learnings and build on them and then not give back. It's almost like in the open source mindset. But in the US, the really only effective time to do it is when you're changing residences. You can do it while you're in the same residence, but it's fairly easy to pierce that veil. And it's quite a bit of work, and no one wants to add more work and frustration when they're moving. It's already enough. And so what we're saying is take one of the most stressful, expensive times in your life and make it more expensive and more complicated and more frustrating.
Right.
And trust us, it's going to be great. Right? Like,
Right.
that's just the reality. And you have to do it concurrent. There's no, you can't sequence it. It has to be at the same time as the acquisition of a new residence.
Right. Right. That's challenging. It's challenging.
Yeah, it's a pain. I was frustrated with it. Um, and I'm sure, my dear spouse was frustrated with it. And she was very accommodating, right? But there were times, where she was like, oh, like, why, honey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got a lot of great tips in this article, and I definitely encourage people to read it.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks, man.
we'll put a link in the comments here, the show notes. But the are there any other sort of stories that you can tell from your work, kind of like you did with the public records, the county records? Because I mean, I know you have individuals from all walks of life, not just crypto people, but celebrities and
Mhm.
politicians, and it's pretty, it's a pretty wide range of people that work with you. Um,
It is.
I don't know.
And we
Is there
have
any just
we have
everything has
people.
needs to be generalized here? I understand, but
Yeah, and we also have people who are, running from abusive spouses, right? Like, there's truly the gamut, from celebrities whose names everyone would know, to, people in the business world who at least are notable nationally or potentially like in their sectors, to people no one's ever heard of but have their own reasons for privacy. Um, as far as like vignettes go, the the thing that we see is, there's and this isn't a vignette so much as like a cautionary tale. The Anything that you implement for privacy is not a one-time fix. It is always an enduring habit forming change of lifestyle. Maybe it's a small tweak, maybe it's a large one, but there's no just like push this button. I wish there was a privacy button, right? Like, I'd be the first person to subscribe. But it requires practice, and when you stop practicing it, you will see a degradation of whatever accruals you've had up to that point. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think of, like, it's hard to tell stories without feeling like I've, you know, shared something out of school. Um, but
right,
speaking of the physical attacks in crypto, one thing I will say, to our Bitcoiner listeners is, every single attack, we've been in the post-attack remediation several times now, some of which involve some of the attacks that have been, notably discussed in the last year. And every single one of them started with the adversary performing some kind of OSINT, open source due diligence, on their target. It
right,
always started as a digital attack first. And
right,
so they're mapping activities, pattern of life, check-ins, properties, spouses, vehicles, speaking engagements, YouTube live streams, like, you name it, right? There is a digital probing that occurs first that is completely passive, right? So the victim that's being targeted has no idea that this digital probing is occurring, because it's all open source information. And the attackers are using that to triage down to who their best targets are, and then find the most opportunistic points to grab them. And an example that I think we probably all know is, there's that guy who was the WonderFi CEO in Toronto in the last year. So, unlike most of these attacks, he was not grabbed at work. He was not grabbed at home. He was grabbed in transit. And so, if we just take a step back and think about that, that means that the adversaries had granularly mapped his pattern of life and knew places or routes that he was taking, and were able to find soft spots along that route where they felt like they could grab him. Right.
right,
So they must have assessed that work was too hard, and maybe he had great home security. I don't know. We were not involved in that project. But they grabbed him off the street in Toronto. And, I think we all know the end of the story, right? Like, he was fortunately released. But um, the message that my takeaway from that is, it's great to do all of this stuff and to have home security and guns and lights and privacy, right? But, like, you have to think of your digital side first, and you will be in more vulnerable positions, right? And many listeners go to conferences, meetups, speak, right? Like, we're live streaming right now, right? So we're sharing information
yep,
uh, right now. And so if you can clean up your digital life, you become a less likely physical target. And so a lot of people think immediately about like, I got to shore up my physical security, and that's great. But if someone can't find you, then you don't need to pull out the gun. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. The the topic of addresses, your OSINT, sort of finding your pattern of life, as you say. Changing your address when you move, I think, is the hardest thing to do, as you said. But a couple steps down from that, this article in the Atlantic goes through pretty detailed. I don't know, pretty detailed, but it goes through a lot of different things that you're doing to keep your online presence pretty obfuscated. Like, not just VPNs, but a few different aliases basically that you can use to log on to different websites that might try to track your location or your whereabouts. Can you give just any sort of basic tips there?
Sure, yeah. And so the goal is to not have any digital artifacts that are necessarily tied to the house, right? Because we have to pay for utilities, and we have to, receive uh, furniture deliveries and whatever, right? Like you can't, at least I've not found a way to live completely off the grid. And so that means that any of those digital artifacts cannot tie back to me if they are tied to the house. And so that means using, masked debit cards. It means using Bitcoin, like for sure. I've absolutely used Bitcoin and Monero for things around the house. Like that would be, I wish we could do everything that way. It means using, obviously VPNs, but also like burner emails or email aliasing. It means never tying through PII, right? Like my personal phone number to things that come to the house, right? All of that stuff. And then dealing with smaller stuff like, friends that have been to the house that we want our friends to come to the house. And we'll continue to want, and we want our kids' friends to come to the house. We're not saying people can't come over, but it means having these conversations with them about, not storing that data, like you mentioned, because contact information is shared with applications. And it means explaining to them why, when we invite them over, we give them a pin drop of the residence, a couple blocks or houses down the way, so that we're not actually sending our address in a text message. And so some of that stuff is somewhat tedious, but it's not that hard once you get used to it. And I actually have something that I've written up for friends, and where you could basically do what I do and self-implement it for around $120 a year. A lot of the tools are not that expensive, right? So you get your Proton Mail account, right? You pay for that. You get your, email aliasing, you pay for that. You're not going to get,
Privacy.com.
yeah, privacy.com. I actually get money back from them, right? And so, there's a few things that are like your password manager, you might pay for that, but it's not that expensive. It's expensive if you want someone else to do it for you. But if you're going to self-implement, it's actually very reasonable on the cost front. It's unreasonable on the time front, right? It's going to take your
Right.
time up much more than it's going to hit your pocketbook.
How do you get money back from privacy.com, Alec? Nothing is free in this life, not even a $400 million jet from Qatar.
If you spend enough with them, you get rebates. So we hit that dubious
That is
honor.
that is a risk. I mean, that one is kind of a risk because obviously privacy.com, you're obfuscating your addresses and your credit cards and whatever with other vendors, but privacy.com itself is a major honeypot, is it not?
Yeah, they have certain things that are mitigants, but yeah, because you have to link privacy with banking, so that they can charge against some source of funds. So yeah, privacy.com is, you got to pick your poison, right?
Yeah.
There just has to be
No, I just
something.
mean if their
Yeah,
database, however secure it is, if
sure.
they got hacked, just like any other database.
Yeah, and there's some ways that you could potentially work around that, but that one's not perfect. We've done at the corporate level some vetting of privacy.com and had conversations with them directly. And I learned that one from Mike Basil, who does his own vetting. And he seemed to reach a point of comfort with them. But I have yet to find a way to do everything without incurring some vulnerability. It's just the reduction of vulnerability. That's what we're
Right.
talking about.
It's a spectrum for sure.
Yeah.
What
So
else
what about
from
you
this?
though? I mean, we've talked about privacy forever. You live in Europe.
Yeah.
I think your experience has been frustrating at times, right?
Uh, well, I mean, nothing too egregious, knock on wood. But I remember Nick Szabo and Naval were doing an interview with Tim Ferriss,
Hmm.
and Szabo doesn't do a lot of interviews, and
Yeah,
so
I remember that
Ferriss,
one.
yeah, Ferriss was asking him, so how do you secure your bitcoins? And he's asking like a legend, basically in the cypherpunk space, how he secures his Bitcoin, and he just said it. He just was laughing as he's saying it, like a big part of privacy is not explaining your process. So I wish I could explain it to you, but I can't. And that was his answer. Like he didn't even go anywhere. Like not even hardware wallet, not multi-sig. That might have been before the days of multi-sig, but like he didn't go anywhere further than just saying I can't explain it. And I thought that was interesting. Naval, of course, took over and said, you can use a hardware wallet and you can back it up and you can do Shamir and you can put it in different places. Um, I mean, for me, like personally, and it's not I'm not like Roger Ver or any of these early Bitcoin investors, but if once you have a little bit of a stack of Bitcoin every year and you're public about it, you talk about Bitcoin, you talk about the adoption of it, whether one likes it or not, you could possibly have a target on your back. I mean, you will, some way, shape, or form. So for me, I do make it public that, I know that, and I'm most worried about, this $5 wrench attack, because you could have, it's always kind of a joke in Bitcoin. It's like, do you have your keys at your mom's house or up in the attic? I mean, you could go down the list, and at least for me, I have been public about the fact that I keep multi-sig in multi-jurisdiction, which took a while to set up, but eventually once you do get it set up, it's pretty nice because this is like deep cold storage. Uh, it's hard to do for a you know average or intro Bitcoiner, but all this stuff comes in stages, as you know, right? Like you got to start small with your personal privacy and then start small with your Bitcoin privacy. But uh, I keep it in multi jurisdiction, and then I also use banks, which is that's like the Winklevoss method. The Winklevi have been public that they've done Shamir. I don't even know if they've upgraded to a multi-sig wallet, but they've been public that they've done Shamir at multiple banks across the U.S. Um, I think if you could do it even outside the U.S., that's better. Uh, it's this interesting question about security, right? It's like we want to get away from banks, but then it's like, is a security deposit at a box like worth the risk if you really want to mitigate something like disaster case? And for me, I think it is actually, frankly, because you can do, you know, I look at Bitcoin for a long term hold. And I know there's amazing things that you can do on Lightning Network and with mobile wallets and everything. But if I want to really like secure my family's funds for the future, multi-sig in the old PSBT, partially signed Bitcoin transaction, is like it's like a superpower once you figure out how to do it. Um, and obviously, there's many wallets, there's many ways to do it. Um, and there's no end to the redundancy. So if you think like, oh, well, you have something in a safe deposit box and the bank says you can't go there anymore, then you're screwed. Well, that's just step one. I mean, you have to have multiple backups in multiple places, and I just say that personally, just so you know. I'm frankly most worried about the $5 wrench thing, and it actually comes back to where I live physically, in the Baltics. I mean, it's very dicey times, as anybody watching this stream knows, because I talk about it all the time, nonstop, and it's not ending. The controversy in Europe, but I cannot be in a situation where I'm taking my like if we would need to leave with my family, I cannot be in a situation where I need to take a hardware wallet or a couple hardware wallets across the border. I'm not going to do that. So it's one of these things. Trace Mayer used to say, "Panic now, don't panic later." I think that's good advice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you've been in the space for a while, uh, and Jameson Lopp said this as well. I mean, no matter how, no matter how long you've been in, people are going to estimate certain things, and they may be wrong on their estimates. They may be thinking that you have more than you do, but they might still make it pretty hard on you and your family. So for me, that's the biggest fear. That's why I always try to just tell people that Multi-Sig is, like, I think, a great tool against that, because you can't $5 wrench it. Like, you have, like, if one of my wallets is in a bank safe deposit box, and it's not just one wallet, there are many, and they're backed up and they're redundant. Um, you can't do that Bitcoin transaction. And anyway, it's going to be multiple Bitcoin transactions that you're going to have to make in multiple places, putting your face in front of a person with your ID in order to spend. Yes, you sacrifice some public facing privacy, but the bank doesn't necessarily know what I have there. Most people might now listening, but I've talked about this. It doesn't really matter. There's everybody's got their own choice there, but for me, it's a question of, if I would have to get up and run because of, like, war, I can't be having my keys up in the attic, somewhere. It's just like, it has to be more complicated than that. And Bitcoin has the tools to do that. So that's what is,
Yeah.
I think, remarkable about it.
Well, everything you said, and we've talked about this offline for years too. It just reinforces that there's a lot of very thoughtful people in the Bitcoin community, and the longer they've been in the community, like, the more thoughtful I find they are about these things. Right? Like, the worst target on my list would be like an OG Bitcoiner, because the chances that they haven't thought through this are fairly slim. Like, if I was going after someone, I'd go after someone that made a bunch of money on NFTs and ICOs, right? Right, like, because the not I feel like I'm, like, knocking those communities, right? But the newer
You
entrants
are a little
haven't
bit.
had
It's
as
fine.
I am a little bit, but the newer entrants haven't had as much time to think about this. They haven't been around long enough to have a friend who was hacked, to have, like, almost lost their funds themselves. Like, I think everyone who's been around for a little while, I certainly have had this experience myself, was like, "Oh shit, I think I mismanaged something here." Right? I forgot to add an element of backup or redundancy or access, that I thought I lost access to something, or been in an exchange hack or something. Like, after some period of time, it's almost 100% likely that you'll experience something like that. And so all of those drive towards more OPSEC, and a more thoughtful and methodical approach. But the problem is, it's hard to be a new entrant and to have that experience in history. And so people coming in who might be very savvy, but have only been in the space for 6 months, like, those are the ones that really should spend the time, right? They're a little more vulnerable, because they don't have the OPSEC history, and they haven't, because it took time to put in place what you have, right? Like, that wasn't an overnight effort between the research and the implementation. And so my word of caution is, if you're newer, and just like you said, like, panic now, like, spend the time now. Because if you're newer, you're registering things, you're signing up for things, like, the exposure is greater when you're coming in. And so, or a form of the exposure is greater when you're coming in. So yeah, I totally agree with everything you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's less risk, obviously, when you're starting. Like, if you're new and you're just thinking about all these things, yeah, it's overwhelming on the one side, and trust me, I know it's overwhelming. But on the other side, like, there's just grain fields on how to plan this, and it's actually not that hard once you dig into it. Once you read some subreddits, or stuff on GitHub. GitHub is very helpful, actually, to show you how to use a lot of these wallets. The readmes are pretty detailed. It's actually not that hard to set up a good multi-sig, and you don't have to do it multi-jurisdictional, like I am happy to announce that I have all the time. You can start small. You can be in, you can open up a bank account anywhere in the U.S. or Europe's a bit trickier for pan Europeans, but it's not impossible. And it just takes time, and it's step by step, like you said. So I think I don't know what other risks. Like, for me, it's about Bitcoin, and it's about like your personal address, and both of those things take time. There's a spectrum there. Uh, do you talk about, like you said? it's better when they can't even find you in the public domain versus having to worry about a gun. Do you guys talk about like physical security? Obviously, the U.S. gun culture is different than the European gun culture, but
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, we
you
have a
talk
whole
about
physical security side of the company that includes like an audit capability and executive protection and logistics, right? Cars, helicopters, planes, like all that stuff. And the more public you are, and candidly, the wealthier you are, the harder that stuff is. And so, God bless if you own a private jet, there's very little privacy in that because they have a tail number that is the equivalent of like a license plate. And there's people that just sit at airports and tail numbers as a hobby. And they track the movements of planes. And like, very famously, Elon Musk has dealt with this.
right,
And so, planes are, yachts are not very private, right? Like everyone knows when, Sergey Brin's yacht is in harbor because everyone knows which one it is. So the physical side of it, yeah, it's critical, not to be overlooked. It's just, even though we're seeing a lot of these $5 wrench attacks, the digital attacks are much more common and much more pervasive. And setting aside Bitcoin and crypto, there's other
yeah, that's
reasons
good
to do this.
information, by the way. That's good information
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well,
because
the
we've
barrier to entry
pretty
on digital attacks is lower.
yeah,
And physical attacks are risky for the adversary. They don't know when they're going to encounter someone who has a gun, or that there was a police patrol nearby that was able to respond super quickly, or like this guy in Soho, right? Like he turns his back for a second. The bad guy turns his back for a second. The victim is able to run out, and he spots a cop within like a half a block, in New York City, which isn't a surprise.
right,
And now that guy's going to be in jail basically forever.
right,
And so, and I think there's much more we're going to learn about that case. But the other reasons to think about this, if you don't own any Bitcoin and you're like, this will never happen to me. I don't even have 5 grand in my house, right? Well, you never know when you're going to be purposefully or accidentally placed in the spotlight by virtue of things out of your control, or things that occur at your company, right? So you might work at a place that suddenly people dislike for some reason that corporate makes. And so this happened we all remember the GameStop thing, right? And so for a while, there were some hedge funds that were, public enemy number one in the country. And obviously the people at the top of those hedge funds were the focal point of all of the, anger and mockery. But there were other people that worked at those hedge funds that were in much lower level roles that also all of a sudden had a bunch of public scrutiny, and they became targeted as well. And so those people did not seek out any public exposure, had nothing to do really with like the asset allocation and investment strategies of the funds they worked for, and were completely at the whim of what their bosses did, and their bosses had no idea that this was going to become the public spectacle that it did. And so those people needed privacy as well. And so
yeah,
like you have to think about these things, or like, another example would be you get an offender bender, and the person you get an offender bender with whom you obtained information is crazy. And they get fixated, or they're trying to like scam you, out of insurance money or something. Like you,
sure,
you have no control over that, right? Or we had someone come to the house, just kind of like a mentally ill person, and they like grabbed the mail out of the mailbox, and none of that mail had any information about us on it. No names, no kids names, right? None of that. We had nothing to do with that. There was nothing we could have done to prevent that from happening, uh, you know barring like gating the property, right?
right.
And so like there are these little things that I would caution people from like being totally dismissive of this, because they don't think that they apply. And sometimes there's family members, right? So I know someone whose brother is a very notable athlete, and the very notable athlete did something that another team really, really hated. And so the rest of the family starts getting targeted like big time. Like people coming by the house, like calls, texts, emails, threats, right? Because like sports fans are, right? And so this is the family members of an athlete who did something on the field that
Right.
was unpopular in another city. So again, like it could have nothing to do with you or me. We could be straight voltage.
Yeah. No, it's hardcore, man. And I guess what I was getting to when I said, make it clear that digital is the first line or comes before the physical attacks. Obviously, that makes sense and that's true, but don't want people get too down because we're talking about some hardcore things with like changing your address or using a trust and whatnot. Obviously, it's there's gradients here for everybody, and it's not easy. And I certainly don't have it figured out as well as you do, although I try. Um, I don't want to hold up your day here, though. I know you're busy with clients.
This is all I do. So,
Talk
um,
about privacy,
yeah,
but
I'll
no, I
give
don't
you
know. I mean,
two.
yeah,
I have
any
two quick vignettes that I'll close on that kind of highlight why this stuff matters. So these are both companies that we've worked with for, in the past. And on one company, they had a privacy program that included some of our services. But you know, they're a big company. They couldn't cover everyone that works there. They couldn't even cover like all of, the senior echelon, which is understandable. You have to draw the line somewhere. And so they drew the line, around a logical perimeter of executives. And then that company became unpopular, very unpopular. And so they started getting what's called a swatting attack, which I think most people in crypto are aware of, right? But that's where someone calls the police locally and claims that there's some kind of emergent uh, activity going on at their residence. So like got a gun to the head, or like gonna kill myself, or whatever. And the police have to respond. So there, at the point that that occurs, there is no walking it back. The police may think it's a swatting attack, but they have to go there and they have to take it seriously. And so in this case, zero of the executives that had this reinforced privacy program, and they weren't doing like all the crazy stuff I do. They just had a, getting off zero plan. Zero of them were swatted. All of the victims were people wherein it was really easy to figure out where they lived. And so I wouldn't say they should go back and, triple the size of their program, because you have to draw the line somewhere. But even small efforts can be deterrents. That was my takeaway from that. There was this other company wherein they are involved in a token, and they had a pretty comprehensive program that included 18 people in the company, and 17 of the 18 people went along 100% with that program as suggested by leadership. One person said, I'm not really interested in doing this. It's kind of intrusive into my life. It's going to get in the way of work habits, right? Whatever. It was years ago. I forget what he said, but he did not participate. That person, he had his phone SIM swapped. The SIM swap was where someone takes over your phone number and puts it onto another phone, and it's usually a social engineering attack. And once they
Yep.
have that, they can receive second factor authentication SMSs. The adversary received SMSs that allowed them to get into corporate token treasury, and a very large amount of tokens were stolen and never retrieved. And then, according to the forensics on that, were siphoned off into multiple different, low KYC, no KYC offboarding points. And so, those funds were never recovered. And so it just shows you like a small loophole. The takeaway there is a small loophole or a small weak point, chink in the armor, right, can be exploited.
Yeah, and that's a great one right there, I think, to end on, because the last 10 years have probably really changed. That is the act of SIM swapping and social engineering. Like, remove your number from any website, Facebook, Google. Do not have your phone number anywhere. Do not use your phone number for two-factor authentication. That's the most basic thing to start with. Definitely use even Google Authenticator, YubiKey. Plenty of ways that you can avoid that one to start. Alec, it's great
Totally.
stuff. I'm going to leave one more picture here of the Atlantic article, How to Disappear by Benjamin Wallace. Our own Alec Harris featured. Very exciting. Good for you.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, where should people go if they want to get more from havenX?
They can't. No. So check us out on the website.
Too busy. Too busy.
They have a contact form there. We've received really, really awesome outreach and from super cool and interesting people, who some of which were just wanted to say that they enjoyed the article, and others, had more interest in that. And just would love to hear from folks. And not I would say, if you have questions, right? Like, I do believe in and paying it forward a little bit and sharing what I'm doing. But not everything requires a contract.
Cool. All right, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for talking about it, and look forward to the next one. I think we got
Cheers, my friend.
Scaramucci next up, so it'll be good.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah. All right, man. Have a good rest of the week. Talk to you soon.
Likewise.